Old man with a sack walks into a bank, claiming ownership. They laughed until they regretted it. An old man, dressed in tattered clothes with a hunched back and a worn-out sack in his arms, quietly stepped into the bustling bank. As he reached the counter, he calmly declared, "This bank belongs to me." For a brief moment, the entire lobby fell silent, then burst into mocking laughter. Security guards rushed over, ready to escort him out, treating him like a delusional vagrant. But just then, the old man opened his sack, and in an instant, the room went dead silent. Faces turned pale. Eyes widened in disbelief. Before we continue this jaw-dropping story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more moments that will truly make you think. That afternoon, as the last rays of the day's sunlight flickered through the trees lining the street, the Hamilton and Gold Bank branch in downtown Savannah remained as peaceful as any other day. The hum of the money-counting machine, the click of high heels, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards blended into the luxurious space with marble floors, glass walls, and soft yellow lighting. None of the employees, from the manager to the security guard, suspected that this quiet afternoon was about to mark the beginning of an event that could shake the very foundation of the bank's history. The automatic glass door quietly opened. A black man, well into his 80s, slowly walked in. He wore a faded, worn-out coat with the shoulders frayed and a weathered fedora that had long since lost its original color. A heavy cloth sack hung from his shoulder, resembling something carried by the homeless people often seen lingering in the nearby park. Inside the counter, the teller, Brenda, blonde hair, heavily made-up face, glanced at the old man with a side-eye, then frowned and whispered to her colleague, "He's probably here to ask for money or wandered in by mistake." Another employee shrugged and snickered. In this day and age, those old folks think they'll be treated like VIPs just by stepping into a bank. The old man said nothing. His deep brown eyes, shaded beneath his silver brows, scanned the entire lobby, as if searching for something familiar. Then he stopped in the middle of the room, standing straight, slow but dignified. Though his back was slightly hunched, his eyes sparkled with an unusual light, radiating a calmness only seen in those who have weathered life's fiercest storms. And then his voice rose. Low, clear, not loud, but filled with weight. "I'm here to take back my bank." Laughter erupted, echoing from the counter. Brenda burst into laughter, tilting her head and mocking him. A nearby customer scoffed, muttering, "He must think he's in a movie." What none of them knew was that the moment they laughed, that was the moment everything began to collapse. No one in that bank could have imagined that the black man standing in the middle of the lobby would dare to declare something that, to them, sounded like pure fantasy. "I'm here to take back my bank." Teller Brenda, with her sharply applied makeup, leaned her elbows on the counter, scanning him from head to toe before saying, "You're wasting our time. If you don't have a legitimate reason to be here, please leave." But the old man didn't budge. He simply lifted the heavy sack slightly, placing it onto the marble floor with a deep, resonant thud. Thud, which made the entire room freeze for a moment. A tall, white security guard named Carl quickly walked over, his hand already resting on his belt, his eyes cautious as though facing a real threat. "Sir, this isn't a place to sleep, and it's not a charity center," Carl said loudly, making sure everyone could hear, his voice dripping with disdain. "We don't serve beggars. If you don't leave immediately, I'll have to call the police." The man silently looked at Carl, not responding verbally. He only opened his mouth to speak a single sentence, filled with restraint. "I'm not asking anyone for anything. I'm here to take back what belongs to me." Brenda scoffed. "What belongs to you? This floor? Or that old torn sack. At this point, a few of the customers in the lobby began to murmur. Some looked at the old man with pity, while others showed visible discomfort. A man in a suit even shook his head, muttering, "Who does he think he is? He should know his place." Carl stepped closer, placing his hand on the old man's shoulder, ready to shove him away. But just then, the black man, still standing straight, his eyes blazing, spoke not loudly, but with a resonance that echoed like a bell in the night. "Before you touch me, look at the past that you are standing upon. This place once bore my name." And then he slowly opened the sack. The entire room fell silent. No one could have expected. What they were about to see would make all the mocking smiles fade instantly. Every eye in the room turned to the old, tattered sack, which seemed to hold nothing but scraps of paper or worthless junk. But when the elderly black man bent down, his thin, trembling hand gently lifting the edge of the sack, the entire bank lobby seemed to freeze. It wasn't leftover food. It wasn't old tin cans. It was money. A lot of money. Old, faded bundles of cash, neatly wrapped in paper strips stamped with the original logo of this bank, a symbol that had disappeared from signs over half a century ago. A thick, leather-bound ledger, its edges copper-plated, fell onto the marble floor with a heavy clunk, like the sound of a gavel striking the table. The air in the room felt as though it had been sucked out. Brenda's face turned pale as she took a step back. Carl, who had been about to shove the man out the door, now stood frozen, his hand still on his belt, but lacking the strength to pull anything out. "My God, is that real?" a customer murmured, eyes wide, staring at the old ledger. The branch manager, a salt-and-pepper-haired man named Walter, stepped out from the back room, and upon seeing the scene before him, furrowed his brow. He hurried over, trying to keep his voice calm. Where are you from? This is a branch of one of America's oldest banking institutions. We don't tolerate this kind of troublemaking." The old man didn't look at Walter. Instead, he bent down to pick up the ledger, flipping through its pages, yellowed, handwritten records of transactions from the 1940s and 1950s, all written in a graceful yet strong hand. Then he stopped at one page. He handed the ledger to Walter, his voice gravelly but heavy with meaning. "My name. Right here." Walter took the ledger and began flipping through it. His gaze stopped on the line. "Founding Depositor, 1948, followed by a clear name." His face slowly drained of color. Brenda stood frozen. Carl slowly removed his hand from his belt. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe too loudly. An ambiguous truth had just been awakened. And if what the old man said was true, then everything in this bank, from the first brick to the chandelier on the ceiling, no longer belonged to them. Walter gripped the ledger tightly in his hands, his eyes still fixed on the name written in faded black ink. Nathaniel Blake. A name that resonated, echoing from a distant past that everyone thought had been buried. The entire lobby was silent now. No one doubted any longer that this was just a rambling old man. The old man, Nathaniel, looked up, his eyes no longer filled with sorrow, but with a steadfastness like steel forged over time. "In 1948, I was the first to invest in founding this bank, along with a friend who later betrayed me." Brenda whispered, "Betrayed?" Nathaniel nodded. "Henry Dalton, a white man, my partner, co-founder. But when the bank began to profit, he plotted to remove me from the board, falsely accused me of being insane, and quietly changed the ownership documents." "You sued them, didn't you?" A customer spoke up. "I tried. But at that time, A black man like me had no voice worth a penny. They locked me in a mental institution based on a forged signature. His voice lowered. I lost everything. My family was torn apart. My honor vanished. And all I had left was years of waiting, gathering evidence, and keeping a vow to come back and seek justice. Walter took a deep breath and placed the ledger on the counter. If this is true, then this bank, the entire infrastructure, personnel, assets, are based on a usurpation. Carl, the tall security guard, remained still, but his gaze had changed, no longer dismissive, but confused and fearful. Brenda lowered her head, biting her lip, clearly regretting dismissing and insulting a man she had no understanding of. Nathaniel slowly took a step closer to the counter. I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here with proof, with memories, and with a pain you've never imagined. All I want is one thing: for the truth to be acknowledged. A wave of tense silence spread throughout the room. People began to realize this was no longer the story of an old man and a sack. This was a confrontation with a distorted history, with a silence that had lasted for over 70 years. Brenda, the blonde teller, still flustered, snapped back, her tone sharp, partly out of shame, partly because she couldn't bear being exposed in front of everyone. Then why didn't you show up earlier? Why wait until you're on your deathbed to come back for what's yours? Who's going to believe that? The room fell silent again. No one laughed, but no one intervened either. Carl, the security guard, stepped forward, his eyes skeptical. Sounds like a story straight out of a novel. Documents can be forged. Evidence can be fabricated. An old black man with a sack walks in, claiming he's the bank's owner. Are you joking with us? Nathaniel didn't get angry. He looked at each person as if he had been accustomed to this kind of contempt his entire life. Then, he pulled out another worn leather envelope from the sack, carefully taking out a series of documents that had been sealed in plastic. The original ownership certificate, handwritten letters between him and his partner, an altered contract, and most notably, a scanned copy of a fingerprint and notarized signature from 1948, matching perfectly with the certificate hanging behind the counter. Walter, the branch manager, went pale. His hands trembled as he placed the documents next to the original ones the bank had displayed as precious historical materials. Everything matched: the name, the fingerprint, the dates, the old bank symbol. The customer started whispering. A middle-aged man murmured softly, "If that's true, then he really is the founder." An elderly woman nearby clicked her tongue, saying quietly, "And they stole his entire life." Brenda, who had once ordered Nathaniel to leave, was now slumped in her chair, her face as white as a sheet. She looked around, no longer able to find anyone to defend her. The mocking laughter had turned into fear. Carl lowered his hand from his belt, where the stun gun had once been ready to draw, and looked at Nathaniel with a mix of respect and shame. I didn't know. I thought you were just a homeless man." Nathaniel spoke slowly, his voice echoing throughout the room. "It's because you always look at black people this way, homeless, poor, insignificant, that you never realize the truth can come from a pair of worn-out sandals and an old sack." All eyes turned to him. Suddenly, a bank that had once represented power, the elite, now faced a lawsuit that could tear down the entire image and history they had built. And the most terrifying thing was, this time, they could no longer hide it. Walter, who had once stood at podiums during financial seminars with a confident smile and speeches about banking tradition and ethics, now stood frozen at the reception desk. He still held the file, but his arm trembled as though he were holding a ticking time bomb. "These documents, if they are real, It means that the entire ownership of this bank since 1950 has been illegal, he whispered, his voice betraying a sense of panic. No one answered. No one dared. Employees, customers, security. All were silent. The air thickened, and the only sounds left were the rustling of papers and the ticking of the clock. Brenda, who had just mocked Nathaniel, lowered her gaze. She tried to salvage something with a few words. I was just following security protocol. I didn't know he was. Nathaniel didn't turn to look at her. He simply said slowly, "You didn't need to know. That's the problem. You didn't need to know who I am. You only saw my skin color, the clothes I wore, and instantly judged me as a nobody, worthless." Carl, who had once coldly placed his hand on the old man's shoulder, now stepped back, his eyes filled with regret. He took off his name tag and stuffed it into his pocket, as if trying to cleanse a part of himself. Then something unexpected happened. The bank employees began to stand with Nathaniel. A middle manager, Mrs. Daniels, in her 40s, Latina, stepped out from the back office. She glanced at the documents, then at Walter with a stern expression. "I've worked here for 17 years. I know the founder's signature. And these documents are real. He is the forgotten founder. And we are part of the deception." She placed her nameplate on the counter. "I cannot continue working at a place built on usurpation and racism." The customers clapped. One clap, then another, then more. Not for the truth revealed, but for an 85-year-old black man, undervalued, dismissed like trash, who had finally forced the entire system of power to bow and reflect on itself. Walter couldn't say a word. He took a step back, as if watching his career crumble before him. In that moment, Federal Crescent Bank, once regarded as the pride of the local financial community, began to crack. Not from the outside, but from the truth within. As the silence continued to envelop the lobby of Federal Crescent Bank, Nathaniel slowly approached the reception desk, the very place where he had once been dismissed like a beggar simply because of his skin and his tattered coat. Now, he didn't need to raise his voice or wave his hands. The truth had already made its own echo. He placed one final stack of documents on the counter. "If you still have doubts," Nathaniel said, his gaze sweeping over the faces now hardened with confusion. "Here is the original record of the bank's founding, a copy of the partnership contract between me and Henry Dalton, once my close friend, co-founder, and later, the one who betrayed me." The name Henry Dalton struck like a lightning bolt. It was the name that adorned every wall in the bank, the model of the sole founder engraved on bronze plaques, etched into the marble floors, and printed on every annual report of the bank. Walter stammered. You're saying Henry Dalton wasn't the sole founder?" Nathaniel nodded, then flipped to a page in the old contract. "My signature. His signature. Certification from the state's Department of Finance. I was the co-founder, the largest investor, the one who planned it all." He paused for a beat. But then he saw me as a black man, a barrier to the image of the bank he wanted to create. So, I was pushed aside. No one spoke. All eyes turned to Walter, who still couldn't utter a word. Nathaniel continued, his voice low and firm. "I didn't disappear from history because I died. I was erased. Dalton tampered with the records, altered the ownership documents. When I protested, I was declared incompetent, without any medical board review. I sued. But back then, who would listen to a black man?" At this point, Brenda, who had once looked down on him, could no longer hold back her tears. She weakly whispered, "I'm sorry, sir." "I didn't know." Nathaniel gave a soft, sad smile. "The problem is, you didn't need to know. You only needed to judge me by my skin and the cloth sack I carried. just like they did to me 65 years ago. A wave of shame spread across the room. The entire bank building seemed to suffocate under the history it had tried to bury. And now, it had been dug up. It could no longer be hidden. A sharp clunk echoed as Walter, the branch manager, opened the final stack of documents Nathaniel had placed on the counter. His eyes scanned each line, each stamp, each signature. There was nothing left to deny, nothing left to reject. The truth was so clear that even the history carved into the walls had to bow its head. Walter swallowed hard. These documents, they're completely legitimate. If this is true, then under the founding shareholding agreement, you still retain original ownership of this bank. Nathaniel nodded, as if he had been waiting for that sentence for half a century. I don't need anyone to believe me with words. I only need the documents and justice. At that moment, those who had once dismissed and insulted him were left standing in silence. Carl, the security guard who had once placed his hand on Nathaniel's shoulder to shove him out, now took a step back, lowering his head, unable to face him. Brenda, the teller who had mocked him as someone who had the wrong door, stepped forward, her eyes red. I was wrong, completely wrong. I didn't know who you were, but I should never have had the right to disrespect anyone like that. Nathaniel didn't answer. He simply looked at her with a calm gaze, the gaze of a man who had lived long enough to know that forgiveness is a strength, but the truth is the weapon. Walter, his face ashen, turned to the crowd of employees and customers standing in stunned silence. I will report this to the bank's leadership, but he took a deep breath. I will personally verify everything. If this is true, Mr. Blake, no, Sir Nathaniel Blake, will be recognized as the rightful co-founder and will have legal rights to this bank. Another silence fell over the room. Not contempt, but respect. Sighs, lowered gazes, and one by one, employees, from the janitors to the accountants, stepped forward, placing their hands on the old bills as a silent act of atonement. It wasn't just money. It was evidence. It was a stolen dream. It was buried honor. And now, it was justice being named. Then, something no one expected happened. Nathaniel turned, slowly walking toward the door. To everyone's surprise, he stopped, turned his head, and spoke with a voice that was low but full of authority. I didn't come to destroy. I came to remind. These bricks were built by the hands of a black man who was betrayed. And today, you've witnessed his return. I will be back, with my lawyer, with the press, and with a story no one can deny. The last rays of the setting sun streamed through the glass, casting a brilliant golden light across his shoulders. He didn't need applause, only a silence loud enough for the past to be heard again. 3 weeks after Nathaniel Blake walked out of Hamilton and Goldbank, with undeniable proof, America was shocked by the headline that appeared nationwide. 85-year-old black man proves he co-founded major bank, betrayed and erased for over half a century. From CNN to the Washington Post, from local news stations to social media, the story spread like wildfire. Online communities were furious. Civil rights organizations took action. Thousands gathered outside the bank branch where it all started, demanding justice for Nathaniel and for the history that had been distorted. An emergency hearing was held. Nathaniel, dressed in a modest, earth-toned suit, stepped up to the witness stand with a presence that silenced the entire room. His voice was calm, but each word felt like a blade cutting deep into the honor of those who had denied him. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for fame. I'm asking for the truth. I'm asking for my name, my past, and the right to walk into the place I built with my own hands, without being treated like a beggar. The court ruled, Nathaniel Blake is the legal co-founder of Hamilton and Goldbank, who was systematically defrauded and erased. The Dalton family, who had controlled the bank for generations, was forced to publicly apologize and transfer the share of stock that rightfully belonged to Nathaniel. A small monument titled "The Forgotten Father of Hamilton and Gold" was erected in the main lobby of the bank branch. Brenda, the teller who had once mocked him, resigned after the hearing. In a brief interview with the press, she said, "I didn't just get fired from a bank. I woke up to my own indifference." Carl, the security guard who had once placed his hand on Nathaniel's shoulder, quietly sent a letter of apology, along with his old security badge. "I don't deserve to wear this badge if I can't protect the truth." But for Nathaniel, victory wasn't in the courtrooms or fame. A month later, he founded the Blake Foundation, a nonprofit organization helping Black entrepreneurs who had been denied investment and financial opportunities. He set up the headquarters, right in the same room that had once been the bank manager's office, the place where he had been shown the door. And one Sunday morning, among hundreds of people, he stood in front of the bronze statue of himself in the bank's lobby and said, "If one day you are looked down upon because of your skin, your age, your background, don't seek revenge. Come back with the truth, because truth is the final wind that topples every wall built on lies." He bowed his head to the crowd, not as a victim, but as a victor, a symbol. And so, Nathaniel Blake, the man erased from history, not only reclaimed his name, but rewrote it in gold.